Probably the finest example is Robert Redford's The Candidate, where he starts out as an idealistic young politician, hoping to change the world, sticking to his principles, and by the end has been pushed through the media and election machinery to the point where he's thoroughly compromised and sells out at the end. Other films in this vein would be The Seduction of Joe Tynan, Bob Roberts, Wag the Dog, Primary Colors, Warren Beatty's Bulworth, and so forth. I think another film in this vein would be Beatty's earlier film, actually directed by Robert Towne, and written by Robert Towne and directed by Hal Ashby, Shampoo, a reflection on the 1968 election of Nixon, in which the politicians only appear on television monitors, but it's more about what kind of a country is this that elected this person president. Given that an ongoing strength of US democracy is that it is possible to be openly critical of our rulers, and something that I think we should not take for granted, for in much of the world, this is simply not an option. The satiric or comic mode can be used for a robust critique of the existing order. But even more compelling to me is a strain of extreme satire, which I will call absurdist. The finest example here would have to be the Cold War comedy Dr. Strangelove by Stanley Kubrick in 1964. There's a lot in the 60s, aren't there? But this, and I'm sure you remember the scene in the war room with Dr. Strangelove and also the president, the ineffectual president, played also by Peter Sellers, and so forth, and discussing the annihilation of the world and what would be acceptable destruction levels for obliterating most of the planet. This subgenre of the absurdist satire has also produced some witty films that are worth tracking down if you've never seen them, or seeing again if you get the chance. One of my favorites is The President's Analyst, a little-known film by Theodore J. Flicker in 1967, in which James Coburn is the president's psychoanalyst and is then hunted down because he has too much information which is dangerous, and there's some secret paranoid vision power behind the whole system. It turns out to be the telephone company. And then a marvelous film that's also, I don't know, I haven't been able to find it on DVD, but if you ever get a chance, take a look at Wild in the Streets by Barry Shear, 1968, in which, in order to please or to mollify disruptive youth, Congress lowers the voting age, and then youth take over. And it consists of wonderful speeches in the US Congress by politicians who are stoned out of their minds, and so forth and so on. And it's just a absolutely ridiculous, delightful fantasy. A more recent trend, though, in using the president as a figure is what I would call, and this is an industry term, the high concept action film. Here the supreme example could be Independence Day, Roland Emmerich, 1996, in which the president, a former military pilot played by Bill Pullman, escapes the White House just in time when aliens attack the world, and finally leads the attack to repel the enemy invaders. And you might remember, in a bizarre way, that the former Secretary of Education, Bill Bennett, who was an advisor to Robert Dole, tried to get Dole to talk favorably about this film because Dole himself, of course, was a former military pilot who had been injured, and have a certain luster to saying this was a good film, patriotic film, healthy film that Hollywood had made, as opposed to a Bruce Willis film that had just come out, sort of ignoring the fact that Bruce Willis was the largest contributor to the Hollywood Republican Party, and so ended up alienating Willis for a long time to come. So there's always these sort of contradictions that occur. But Independence Day then does move into that conservative and military message that I mentioned earlier, in which bold leadership directly confronts a global menace. But certainly a close second to Independence Day would have to be Air Force One, in which Harrison Ford, as the president, fights terrorists with his bare hands on Air Force One and finally throws them off his plane. The hurrahs of the audience as the kind of action president that we all like to see. Two final films that I'll mention. If we had just talked about high concept, probably we could use low concept to talk about Mars Attacks, Tim Burton's film in 1996, in which the president loses the day to the Martians. and I don't want to spoil anything for you, but Jack Nicholson has a very rude, as president, has a very rude awakening. And a charming little film, which was sort of prescient, about 5 years ahead of its time, Dave by Ivan Reitman in 1993, in which Kevin Kline is called on, because he looks like the president, to stand in for the comatose president, and then ends up with the First Lady in a interesting and sort of romantic comedy kind of pairing. Okay, let's move to, but I think part of showing you this range is to suggest that talking about politicians and making commercially viable entertainment about them, it has a very long tradition in the United States. And I think it's useful for us to have that in mind, that we do live in a culture in which sometimes we have, or some parts of the population have reverence for a political figure, and other times we have absolutely ridicule for a political figure. And certainly we can see that, I think, in the mixed reaction to a film that's out right now, Oliver Stone's film about George W. Bush, in which some people are outraged that there seems to be satire or comic moments in it, and yet, those are people on the right who are offended by it because it's very critical, apparently, of Bush. I've seen it. I'll let you make up your own mind. And yet on the left, people have been very critical of it and say it isn't harsh enough, and they should have really drilled that character more, and it's too sympathetic, and it makes him interesting or likable. Okay, so I think it's interesting depending on where you're coming from, you can read the same object in very contradictory ways. Okay, I want to move on and talk about the relation of the private and the public. There's a long-standing melodramatic interest in the contrast between public lives and images of the powerful on the one hand, and then their private lives. We're very familiar with this in lots of popular forms, such as the long-standing boardroom and bedroom novels and films and TV. Dynasty would be an example from the 80s, that purport to show behind the scenes of the powerful and often glamorous. In the past, this was most commonly fictional, but with a newer trend to popular history writing, we have reports of the private lives of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower, these are mistress stories, John Kennedy, happy birthday, Mr. President. And this has even evolved into a new kind of looking back at US history, as in the John Adams TV series, where the large public events or the important decisions that the character has to make is combined with revealing their personal life and their family life and so forth.